Sahana bhunaktu sahaviryam karavavahai tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, so Śrī tattva-sutra, in the study guide, we're on page 42. Friday, we ended with Tadvari Pranipatena Pri Prashnana Sevaya Upadikshantite Jnanam Jnaninas Tattva-darshana. The proper way to inquire from the spiritual master with humble, submissive inquiries and a service attitude. And in that way, the spiritual master, who is bona fide, who has actually had darshan of the truth, not just knows the truth in theory, but has actually seen the truth, he will impart knowledge unto you as a reciprocation of these humble, submissive inquiries and this service attitude. The next sutra defines the result of applying such discrimination. So that tells you how, and then Sutra 29 will tell you what happens when you do approach the spiritual master properly. So, Sutra 29. Na cha prakrita vad indriya grahyatvam vaikuntasyadho kshajatvat. The divine abode of Vaikuntha is not accessible to the mundane senses due to its transcendental nature. Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport to Śrī Īśopaniṣad mantra 5. We should not take it for granted that because we cannot see God with our eyes, the Lord has no personal existence. Śrī Īśopaniṣad refutes this argument by declaring that the Lord is far away but very near also. The abode of the Lord is beyond the material sky, and we have no means to measure even this material sky. If the material sky extends so far, then what to speak of the spiritual sky, which is altogether beyond it? In the purport to Śrī Īśopaniṣad mantra 12, Srila Prabhupada writes, the Sanskrit word asambhuti refers to those who have no independent existence. Sambhuti is the absolute personality of Godhead, who is absolutely independent of everything. In the Bhagavad Gita 10:2, the absolute personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, states, quote, neither the hosts of demigods nor the great sages know my origin or opulences, for in every respect I am the source of the demigods and the sages. End quote. Thus, Krishna is the origin of the powers delegated to the demigods, great sages, and mystics. Although they are endowed with great powers, these powers are limited, and thus it is very difficult for them to know how Krishna himself appears by his own internal potency in the form of a man. Many philosophers and great rishis or mystics try to distinguish the absolute from the relative by their tiny brain power. This can only help them reach the negative conception of the absolute without realizing any positive trace of the absolute. Definition of the absolute by negation is not complete. Such negative definitions lead one to create a concept of one's own. Thus, one imagines that the absolute must be formless and without qualities. Such negative qualities are simply the reversals of relative material qualities and are therefore also relative. By conceiving of the absolute in this way, one can at the utmost reach the impersonal effulgence of God, known as Brahman, but one cannot make further progress to Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead. So the idea of this whole section is through Samkhya, just meaning the process of understanding the difference between spirit and matter. One can understand that we are spirit and we're not matter. It means we feel that we are eternal, right? The fact that this body's going to die, it's a unnatural feeling for us, right? And we also know that the difference between a dead body and a live body, chemically, there's no difference. There's no material difference. So there must be something more, that which animates the body. So spirit must be there. It must be superior to matter. This material, I don't have anything to do with this material world. And one might, by this process of negation, try to conceive with our limited fund of knowledge what transcendence might look like. So what the pure spirit soul would look like, if there is a God, what kind of qualities he would have. And so through negation, we come up with these ideas based on our experience in the material world. I have this form. If I cut it, it hurts. You can actually cut limbs off, and then I'm limited. Now I can't do as many things, or I can't do things the same way that I used to. I might be able to adapt and figure out another way to do the same things, but in a different way. So many different limitations are there. I can't just stay up completely and engage in activities. I have to periodically sleep. I have to feed the body, so it has energy. There's so many limitations to it. So I might come to the conclusion that spirit doesn't have any of these things. Spirit doesn't eat, doesn't sleep, doesn't have a form, because this form is terrible, right? We might come to these conclusions based on logic, right? I logically observe that form is terrible, and pastimes are terrible, and time is like these things. And so we might think that the spiritual realm, or whatever we're going to call it, because we're just basing it on our own experiences and observations. So transcendence might be like this, and this, right? But we're basing it on our sense perception, which is also limited. So we're probably making a mistake, first of all, but we're definitely not going to get to the bottom of it, right? We're not going to get to there. That's why it's so important to approach a spiritual master, as we were talking about at the close of class on Friday, right? Because we could try all we want to figure out what the difference is between spirit and matter, but we're not going to come to the supreme conclusion, because we are identifying with the material body. We have imperfect senses. We commit mistakes. We have the tendency to come under illusion, or the propensity to come under illusion, and we have the tendency to cheat, right? These are the defects that come along with the material body. So trying to resolve these issues and figure out what transcendence is through the medium of these senses that we have cannot be effective. We have to go to someone who has seen the truth, tattva-darshana. They have actually seen the truth. And we can't just go to them and demand that they tell us what they know. We don't just walk up to them and say, hey, I've heard you've seen the truth. I want it too, so give it to me, right? No, we approach them submissively. We ask questions and actually want to hear. We don't question them like, who are you to tell me how to live my life? No, we actually ask them questions like, could you tell me how to live my life? We want to know. And since there's no way to ever repay what they're giving us, because it's such a transcendental thing that has more value than we can possibly even begin to calculate, then as at least some sort of reciprocation, we offer them service. So whatever I can do for you to repay you for giving me this not transcendental knowledge. And so this is our method, right? Not by trying to understand what transcendence is by negating what we have bad experience of in the material world. So, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur comments on this sutra. The transcendental abode Vaikuntha is entirely devoid of all mundane qualities. Right? So that already starts out sounding like what these other people are doing, right? They're doing the negation, right? Vaikuntha has no mundane qualities. So someone might say, see, I told you, there's no form, there's no qualities, there's no pastime, there's no, eating, sleeping, like that. But they would be wrong. The mundane qualities such as shape, expansibility, etc. are all imperfect. The material objects are victims of inertia, and because of it, without displacing an object, another object cannot be accommodated on its place, right? So this book is here, and I want to put the bottle there in that same spot, but I can't because it's there. I have to move it first, and then I can put it there. All right. I can put it on top of the book, but if I want to put it on the table, I have to move that first. Since this defective quality of inertia is not present in Vaikuntha, it is free from the obstacles of expansion, right? So it doesn't have that problem there in the spiritual world, where if you want something, that means somebody else has to not have it. Or if you want to be somewhere, then nothing else can be there, like that. The eternally existent transcendental blissful form of the Lord is the only resort of the jivas. However, if this form is attributed with material qualities, then it becomes idolatry. Vaikuntha is non-phenomenal or supramundane abode. Before inquiring about that abode, we should understand what is the meaning of the word phenomenal. What is the meaning of the word phenomenal? Yeah, say it.
Sensible,
perceivable by the senses, that which we can perceive. Good. So then that's why the next sutra is here, which is the last sutra of this chapter, Sutra 30. Indriyani tat vishayas tajjata avashcha manasa saha prakritas chid upadhi tvaj janyatvaj-cha. The senses and mind, their objects like form, taste, smell, etc., and the feelings produced by their acts of perception are all material, for these are all created within the material world, and they are the result of the soul's misidentifying itself as a material body. So, all of these things, the senses, the mind, the sense objects, etc., they are all material, which means they're temporary. They'll go through the 6 transformations. And the reason being is because they're created within the material world. So everything created in the material world has to go through these 6 transformations. And the last part is the most important. They are all the result of the soul's misidentifying itself as a material body, right? So oftentimes also, just as we like to blame others for our misery, right? It can't be my fault, it's got to be Maya's fault or Satan's fault or God's fault. Couldn't be mine. Oftentimes we're very dissatisfied with the body also, because it doesn't do what we want it to do. Sometimes it gets sick, sometimes it gets too tired to do something that we want to do. Sometimes it doesn't have enough energy to do the things we want to do. And we say, this body, it's useless, it's holding me back from doing all these things. And we say it as if somebody else gave us this body. It's someone else's fault that our body, not only that we possess the body, but that it's so limited, right? But it's all because we misused our free will and we're identifying with that body. That's why we're having to deal with all the miseries there, right? So another very important aspect, again, it's our fault, and it's the same fault, right? It's the misuse of the free will. The same thing that we get mad about the material world, why it exists and why there's always suffering, because we misused our free will. And then, the fact that this body is suffering, it's just a smaller version of that. So the whole material world, that's the big problem. And then even the smaller problem, it all starts by us misusing our free will.
Why we misuse our free will?
Why did we misuse our free will? I wish I knew the answer to that. We wanted to know what it was like to be separate from Krishna, to be an independent controller and enjoyer. Why? I don't know. But if we redirect our consciousness back to our original state, then we won't make that mistake ever again. So it won't matter why. It'll just matter that we finally. It's
question, because jiva under influence material energy.
Jiva
Can be under influence material energy.
Yeah, if we misuse our free will.
Yeah.
But only if we misuse our free will. If we don't misuse our free will, then we don't come under the influence of material energy ever.
It's just a circle.
Circle?
I mean, jiva misuse free will because she under material energy. Because of material energy, she misuse free will. Or no.
No, it's not like that. No. Because that would mean that it's inevitable to come to the material world. It's not. There are jivas that never made this decision to come here. Where's the Buddha? There's a Siddha, Nitya Siddha. So there are jivas that never made this bad decision. We, the minority actually, rebellious living entities, we did. So we didn't make that decision because there's the option. There's options there, and we either do it or not, right? Our reason is just because we have a sense of individuality, and we understood that we can do this or we can do that. So we just decided to do that, which is not the original.
That's why we decided to do that.
I don't know. But it was definitely our choice. It wasn't that we had no choice. Because what you're saying, if you make it a circle, then there's no choice. It just happens. It's not like that. Some people say, and I don't. This is just an example of how you can sort of make this mistake. It's not necessarily exactly what always happens or whatever, but here's an example. Have you ever seen somebody that has exactly what you want? You want something, I don't know what it is, but then you see someone walking and they have that exact thing, whether it's a car, a motorcycle, a particular girlfriend, a pair of sneakers, whatever, and they have it, and you think, man, I wish I had that, right? That's all it takes. That's all it takes, Everything is working, in the spiritual world, everything is working around Krishna. Everything's going nice and smoothly. And at some point, instead of working in harmony with that, we thought, oh, I could be the center. I could do that. I could just be the enjoyer. And here we are. Now, that leads to a very big conversation, because there's a lot of debate whether we were actually in the spiritual world interacting with Krishna in his personal pastimes before, because, not even the leaves fall from Vaikuntha. Once having gone there, one never returns here, right? And so some people think that as a preaching tactic, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur came up with this idea that we were in the spiritual world and then we came here, but actually no, the jivas that are here were always here, right? Because they're called nityabada. Nityabada means always bondage. So how can you say that they were ever in the spiritual world, right? These are the arguments that are given. But nityabada, it means, as I think we were dealing with that in one of Pandit Prabhu's classes, I don't know if it was this morning or last week, but it means that since time immemorial, we've been bound. You cannot trace out our existence in our material existence. So, in that sense, since we can't trace a beginning, that means we're perpetually in this cycle here in the material world. As soon as we redirect our consciousness, then we are perpetually in spiritual consciousness. We actually are then nityasiddha, right? Because time doesn't work the same way in the material world and the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, as we discussed Friday, time facilitates the pastime, right? Whatever pastime is going on, there will be factors that look a lot like time, like the sun or the moon or the seasons, but they're just serving the pastime to make it better, to help the mood. It doesn't, then all of a sudden the sun starts setting and you weren't ready for the sun to start setting. No, you're doing the thing. The sun's, where it needs to be to facilitate the pastime, right? So since time works differently there, it's not that you get there and there was something that you missed that happened before. Like here, like Tulsi Prabhu came in a little later than you did, so he missed something that you heard, right? But it doesn't work like that in the spiritual world. The spiritual world, you're there, and you're aware of everything that's ever happened. There's a sense of past, present, and future, but it's not the same like here. So you could be having a discussion like, oh, remember that time when yada, 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 which involves the past, but it's not really like the past that we experience here, which is linear, right? It's just the spiritual reality, and so it's eternal. So there's no past, present, or future in that regard, right? So when we're there, let me go back, nityasiddha, because that's a state of eternality, and there's no sense of not being there, right? So there's not this sense of I missed something. You're just there serving Krishna and you're experiencing it. So some people come up with different ideas of how, maybe there was, anyway, a lot of different ideas that are being discussed. But the point is through the acharyas and through the Shastra, we understand that there is this such thing as free will, and that we misused it to come here. So whether we were actually playing with Krishna or we just observed from whatever position you want to call it a tattva box or whatever you want to call it doesn't matter. You saw the two options and you chose that one, right? That's the truth of the matter. Whether it was actually you were there, playing with Krishna and you made that decision, or whether you just understood that there was that doesn't matter. We made the wrong decision when we're here. And that's what we have to understand. Because those that say, no, we were never in the spiritual world, so therefore it's not my fault that I'm here, right? So what's going to be the motivation to get out? If it's not my fault that I got here, then I don't have to do anything to get out, right? How could I do anything to get out if I'm not even the one that got me here, right? Someone else is the problem. I got to wait for someone else to get me out of here, right? But this is our doing, and it's repeated over and over and over throughout the Shastra that this is the problem, right? We misidentify with the material body, we misused our free will to come here, etc. So, no, it's not a circle like that, and it's not. We had a choice and we made the wrong one. And here we go.
Kind of say, we in the material world, out of our desire to be in the material world.
Yeah, our desire to be the controller or enjoyer, either way. Yeah.
So our desire.
Yes.
We should transform our desires.
Exactly, because that's what in the 15th chapter of Gita, the beginning of it, the imperishable banyan tree, the upside down one, it's reflected on desire. And so that has to be cut down with the weapon of knowledge. So with knowledge comes understanding what is our true desire. So not material desire anymore, we convert that to spiritual desire. And then the tree is gone, and then instead of staring at a reflection of an upside down tree, the shadow of it, we see the substance, and that's what we're dealing with.
Therefore, we try to, let's say, clarify our desires or understand this is not verbal desires, this favorable desires, and we are able to desire favorable things.
Yes.
So what practice?
Exactly. You wanted to add something?
Yeah, I want to ask, can we say that once we make the initial choice, then we enter in something like a magic circle, and then actually it's very difficult to come out. Once you, as you said, you see and you say, okay, I want this, I want the material reality.
Yeah.
But once you're inside, once you're influenced by the molds, then it's kind of
Means you're in a vicious cycle, but when he said circle before, he was trying to say, he was putting forth the thought that the reason we're here in the material world is because we misused our free will, but we misused our free will because by nature, we can use our free will, as if that's the only option. But it's not the only option, because we had the two options, but once we made it, then we're in a vicious cycle, sure. But it's not because we have the option that we're here. That's one of the reasons. The option was there, okay, but then we made the decision, so that's why we're here.
And most are not making this decision.
Exactly. They're making the right decision, and they're quite happy about it. Yeah.
Because we have free will, we can make decisions.
Yes.
This is our nature.
Yes. One way or another. Because again, Krishna, love, in order for it to be relishable, it has to be a voluntary thing. If it's just that this is how it's programmed, it only works this way, then there's nothing to relish. It's not a relationship. It's, it's a thing. But we're individuals. So there has to be this possibility to say, no, I want to actually try this instead. Because then when it happens properly, make the decision, then it's actually a relationship, and it's actually relishable, and it's actually bliss. Otherwise, it's just a machine doing what it's supposed to do. What's the fun of that? Right? I mean, sometimes we have fun when a machine's doing what it's supposed to do because it's serving us, so there's still a relationship there, but this is talking about, realities. So realities can't be relishable unless there's a possibility that, it doesn't do what it's, right?
Therefore, Krishna created out of compassion to souls, conditioned souls, he created this material world.
Yeah, well, he created free will, and because some of us misused our free will, he created this material world. So that, out of compassion, because otherwise, the only other option to be separate from Krishna is not exist. So he says, okay, you still exist, and you're under the impression that you're the separate, independent controller and enjoyer. But you're not. And since there are also so many others that are also thinking that they're independent, there's going to be a whole lot of conflict, because I'm going to claim something that he's claiming, and we're going to fight over it. And then you're going to be standing too close to what I'm claiming. Maybe you're even inside of it. So then now I'm claiming you're also my property. And then there's going to be a conflict, and that's how all these conflicts will go. And we think it's such a terrible thing, but it's actually because of compassion, because love exists properly. We've misused that love. And since there are so many people here misusing it, it feels like suffering. But none of us are in any real danger, because the soul can't be burned by fire, withered by the wind, cut to pieces, moistened by water, etc. But psychologically, we're going through so many different sufferings, right? Some people worse than others because of what they did in their in their past. But as far as Krishna is concerned, it's compassion. Now that can sound terrible, especially in the midst of a crisis, right? When someone is talking about, millions of people being slaughtered in some war, and someone says, "Oh, it's God's plan because He loves us," and you're like, "What are you talking about? All these people," and then it can seem almost insensitive to say that, but it's true, right? And when we see that that's what's going on, then we can appreciate it. But otherwise, it just seems like, how can you even say that? Because those who identify with the illusion that we're living in, to them, that's their only reality. And to see so many people suffering is a huge deal, especially if God, who's omnipotent, can fix it all. Yeah, He can fix it all. He could force you to love Him, but then that's not love. It's forced. So we have free will because of compassion. So once we actually see it, then okay, we understand it. It might be hard at some points in our life when we're really identifying with our body, because whether someone close to us is going through trouble, or even we ourselves are going through trouble, it can be harder to actually understand that. But it's the truth, and the more we actually understand it and practice it in our daily lives, then the better off we become, the closer we get to Krishna. Good. Something else? No. Okay. So then Srila Bhakti, Thakur comments on this last sutra of the chapter. The mind, the senses, and the sense objects are all material objects. The mental image of material objects is also material, and it never becomes spiritual. The spiritual knowledge is not attained by any external experience because it is self-manifest. Right? That's an interesting sentence. So nothing we can do physically can manifest spiritual knowledge. It's self-manifest. So it's there because it's in our nature, but we have to get it a certain way. We have to get it through a spiritual master who's already seen that truth, and we have to ask for it in a proper way so that we can also receive it. So it's there, but it has to come through the proper channel. Otherwise, if we're trying to get there by, okay, if you put this here and then turn it over and then spin it 90 degrees and then, like we're trying to solve a puzzle doing physical things. If we think that that's going to get us spiritual knowledge, then we don't understand what spiritual knowledge is. It's not a mechanical thing. We're using material things to try to solve a spiritual problem, and it doesn't work like that. Since the mundane faculty of the mind is not eternal, it cannot be accepted as the eternal characteristic of the jivas, right? It's not eternal, so it's not going to get us the eternal thing. Thus, the mind is also a material object, though it is superior to the other mundane objects. End of chapter 3 of Śrī Tattva-sutra. We'll read the summary here, and then we'll have a little bit of discussion on the whole section, because that'll be the end of Sambandha. So chapter 3 of Śrī Tattva-sutra pertains to the third topic of the Upanishads, Achit, the material energy, and its origin and connection to Brahman. The external energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, is endowed with material qualities whose transformation results in the evolution of many details of this unlimited cosmic manifestation. The external energy is without beginning or end because it is the divine energy of the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna. Matter, being unconscious, cannot act by itself. When activated by consciousness, it begins to work. Those living entities who are averse to Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, are imprisoned in variegated bodies by the external energy, Maya. The external energy constitutes the accommodation which is known as space. Time is a form of relation between the conditioned souls and the external energy. Conditioned by matter, the living entity mistakes sense gratification as bliss, Ananda Brahma, and material existence as the transcendental abode, Vaikuntha Brahma. To become free from these delusions, one should discriminate by transcendental knowledge of the absolute truth. The spiritual world is transcendental beyond mundane sense perception. The mundane senses, sense objects, the feeling derived from their contact, and the mind, all these are material in existence due to the conditioned state of the living entities. Okay, so that concludes the the Sambandha section of this book, which the first chapter was Ishvara, the second chapter was Chit, the living entities, and the third chapter was Achit, the material nature. And so knowledge, as described in Bhagavad Gita, and Srila Prabhupada repeats this over and over, how to define knowledge. It says to know what is spirit, what is matter, and who is the controller and source of both. Doesn't use the word source. What is it? The
source.
Yeah, but I think he uses another word. Origin, maybe. Origin, but anyway, means the same thing. But so when Srila Prabhupada defines knowledge in Bhagavad Gita, this is what he says. So this is Sambandha. Knowing the difference between spirit and matter, knowing also the Supreme Lord and the relationship between those, right? Not just the relationship between spirit and matter, not just the relationship between the living entity and the spirit and the Supreme Lord. You have to know the relationship of all of them, right? Because when we make the right decision, then yeah, it's just
source of both.
Is it source of both? Is that what I said the first time?
Origin.
Origin. I think I said source first, but I thought it was wrong, so then I said origin. Okay, so source. Yeah. Thank you. Right. So this is Sambandha, knowledge of the relationship between the Supreme Lord, the Jiva, and the external energy. Do we have any questions on those first three chapters? Yes, Tulsi Prabhu.
Can you please shortly explain again these two concepts of Ananda Brahma and Vaikuntha Brahma?
Yeah, so Ananda is bliss and Vaikuntha is obviously the supreme abode. But when we're conditioned by matter, we don't have knowledge of the supreme bliss or the supreme abode. So therefore, we think that any sort of sense gratification here, that's Ananda. And this is Vaikuntha. This is where we belong. So we're identifying this place as where we belong, and any positive feeling or even any cessation of pain, we consider that bliss, right? So if there's this beeping noise that's terrible and it's like, and it's constant and it's terrible and we're like, when it stops, we're like, oh, this is pleasure, yeah. But really, it was just the cessation of pain. It wasn't really pleasure.
So Brahma here is taken in the sense of illusion, mistake. Mistake that in this material world is another and it's
yeah, the way it was, let's see, we covered it Friday in more detail, so this was just the, but yeah, that's the general principle there. We covered a lot on Friday. What? Did I go right by it? What's that? We did cover a lot of pages. I'm trying to see exactly where it was and how it's Ananda Brahma and Vaikuntha Brahma. What's that? 32? Oh, we started at 32, okay. But where does it actually talk about these? Because there was a section that actually talked about those in more detail. But yeah, that was the Oh, here we go. 38 on Sutra 27. Due to the delusion created by Maya, the fallen souls with their deficient intellect misconstrued the phenomenal misery, bliss, and the phenomenal abode as their eternal abode. And so these two illusions are called Ananda Brahma and Vaikuntha Brahma. And then they're also discussed in mantras 7 and 11 of Śrī Īśopaniṣad. Yeah, it's just our misidentification because we don't have ready experience of the real thing, and so we just imagine that this is it, this is the all in all. Good. Okay.
Can you please comment a little bit on this sentence? Time is a form of relation between the conditioned souls and the external energy.
Yeah, so that's referring to when Srila Bhakti-yoga Thakur said there's two subjects, spirit and matter. So he didn't consider space a separate one because that's just the area that spirit and matter interact. And time is the situation. So the space is the area, and then time is what those two go through, right? Let me look again so I can word it properly. That was toward the end when he said there were two. Oh, no, later.
So, like in order these two to interact in this space, should have time. Otherwise,
Yeah.
time they cannot interact.
Right, but so he was saying it's just not a separate thing. It's just what we're moving through. Yeah, so he says it best here, just in the summary. Time is a form of relation between the conditioned souls and the external. So it's the form of the relation. Space is what accommodates it, and then time is the form of the relation. So it's still, we're just talking about spirit and matter. Because otherwise, people will try to make so many different categories and make it confusing. And so Srila Bhakti-yoga Thakur just breaks it down to this. And he also quoted someone else who counted like this, just as two. But I can't find it right now. Was it before that? I thought it was after. But yeah. No. Maybe it was before that. Oh yeah, okay. Sutra 25, page 37. Time can be defined as a form of relation between the fallen souls and phenomenal nature. So previous to that, yeah, so chapter 3 started like that. It's talking about matter. And then when conscious life pushes it into action, then it appears to be alive and conscious. So then it's the relation in Sutra 22 and 23. Then we're, in the physical body. So then there's the relation between the two, the reaction. And then talking about how time is the form of relation between those two. Oh, so he's referring to Shandila in the book Bhakti-sutra. He also says the major categories are 1, spirit, and 2, matter. There is no third. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur on page 37, the commentary to Sutra 25. Therefore, the author of this book, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, has accepted only two such principles, sentience and non-sentience, spirit and matter. And then gave authority to back that statement up from Bhakti Sutra. And then explained how time, Bhagavatam 3:26-16, the influence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is felt in the time factor, which causes fear of death due to the false ego of the deluded soul who has contacted material nature. So time keeps things going, and it also reminds us that our material situation is going to end. So it keeps us uncomfortable. So it keeps us understanding that this isn't where we belong. It's actually a good thing. Pandava, was it this morning he was talking about, somebody said, I don't care about the suffering in this material world, just let me, keep my body, I guess. I didn't hear the quote before, but that's what he said. That's not how it works. The suffering is there because we misidentified, so everything in the material world has to be temporary, has to go through those 6 transformations, or at least 2 of the 6. You can come into being and die immediately, but usually there's at least some dwindling. Srila Prabhupada mentioned that in the one. He's like, and if you are able to, then you can grow and produce byproducts. But you don't always do that. Sometimes you just come into being, remain for the briefest of times, and then die. You don't even get to dwindle. It's just like a quick thing. So at best, the 6 transformations, right, are there. And then these other things are just basically facilitating it. Time drives it along. It keeps us in fear, and it keeps us understanding. So the Kala Chakra represents time, represents the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So those who see it are constantly reminded, okay, time is going. Eventually, this is it, right? And it's only shown inside the Loka mountain range and above Bhumandala. Below, you don't see the Kala Chakra. So in the subterranean heavenly planets, where you also have to be pious to be there, but it's in a way that you're pious, but you do not accept the authority of Lord Vishnu. So they don't have stress, right? They're there, they're not reminded that time's going to run out. So they live a long, happy life of sense gratification, and the only time they ever get stressed out is when they see the chakra coming to off them. So they get stressed out just before they die. It's the only stress they have. Otherwise, they just enjoy. It's like a casino. You go there, you don't know what time it is, you don't know what day it is, you don't care. You're just there to enjoy. There's no clocks on the walls, there's no windows, right? So it's like that, but way more enjoyment, because here we don't have the piety to enjoy that much. There they do. So the Kala Chakra is there. Time is there to remind us that things here will end, but it's here to remind the pious people who actually understand Vishnu's position, to remind us to not waste our time, right? The others, whatever, they're wasting the time anyway, so may as well not disturb them. They earned it, right? But once it's done, then they have to come back and do it all over again. So it's not worth it. Sometimes I've heard devotees, they read the descriptions of these subterranean and heavenly planets, and they're like, that sounds good. That's enjoyment without worry. I'm like, don't worry, man, you've been there. Chances are we've been there, right? It's not sustainable, so. But yeah, that's what time is. Good? Yeah.
There's something interesting here with this expansibility and shape and inertia. Because yesterday during Bhagavatam class, Maharaj was speaking. He was reading some conversation between Prabhupada's disciples and Srila Prabhupada, and they were saying that if they say to scientists that Maharaj Ugrasena has had 10 quadrillion personal bodyguards,
Right.
It's very difficult to conceive this number. It's like 16 numbers.
Sure.
Sorry, 16 zeros.
Yeah.
So, and somebody commented from the devotees in the class that this applies to spiritual growth. Because also Dvaraka is manifesting on this
Mhm.
dharmas are manifesting from the spiritual world.
Yeah.
And if there is this inertia is not there, responsibility is not there, so there is no difficulty with space.
You have to
also.
displace, yeah. The cool thing about this is, so that's actually the explanation. But also, materially speaking, in mathematics, you know what a fractal is?
Mhm.
Okay. So you can have an infinite perimeter in a finite area. That doesn't explain how you get that many people in, you know, an area, of course, but it's far out how, and then you can go the other way too. So that's with like Coach's snowflake, but then there's also Gabriel's horn, where an infinite surface area holds a finite amount of fluid. So there are these things, at least we can conceptually understand. But the spiritual world is even further beyond that, because it's just, it's not something that we are ready to experience through these senses. And that's the problem, since we are identifying with this body and we have these senses, we can't perceive of it, because we think that we're identifying with something that's completely false. But yeah, if Krishna has, or Krishna's associates have their associates, then yeah, they can occupy a huge amount of people in such a small space. Just like when Krishna was going different places for his pastimes, you see that these places are pretty far away. And he's just a young boy with his cows, and he's going out, and you know, he's walking that far. You know, when we go on Vrindavan Parikram, it's like, wow, this is pretty far. And then you know, there are the examples where it's like Rajamanda's like a lotus, and so it could close up, so Krishna can go from there to there in no time. But also, Krishna is Krishna, right? Time doesn't work the same way for Krishna when he's here. So when it's talking about the rasa dance, it says like, you know, they're enjoying for several nights of Brahma. I think it says like that. And so that's how long they're actually enjoying. But the material clock is still going. But it works like that. They're actually having that much enjoyment in that. So that much time worth of enjoyment in this much time. Right. And all of that can happen with Krishna. But in the material world, it doesn't work like that. In the material world, we conceive of things like that. When I was in 10th grade English class, we read this poem. It was called Ode on a Grecian Urn. And there are different versions of this same sentiment, but this author was envious of a vase, a Grecian vase that had two lovers just about to kiss on there. And he was actually envious of that, because that's like the best part of the relationship, where there's this intensity and that, you know, you don't know what to expect. And you don't get better than that, even in the actual act. So therefore, he was envious of that, because on the urn, they're eternally having this, you know, nervousness and you know, expectations and, you know, all of those things. And it's eternally, you know, happening on this urn. But life is not like that, because, you know, you do this and then, you know, this happens and then there's arguments and then, you know, all these other things go on, and, you know, it's not the bliss that is, you know, as advertised on the urn, you know, as you would say. So yeah, there are so many poems and songs like that. There's songs about stopping time. I think Romeo and Juliet. I think Romeo wanted to stop the moon, because then, you know, because on the next day something was supposed to happen, so he wanted to stop the moon so that he could spend eternity with Juliet. So this concept is always there, of trying to make a moment last forever. You know, I'll stop the world and melt with you. That's another one, right? But we can't do that. But Krishna actually can do that. So he can make a moment last forever. And when we actually become pure devotees, then if we're not seeing Krishna for a moment, it feels like an eternity, right? So one time we were hearing Maharaj give class, and he was saying how, Krishna's walking through the forest, right? There's trees in the forest, obviously, that's what forest is. And so when Krishna would walk behind a tree from their vision, they would think, Krishna's gone. And they're actually experiencing Krishna being gone, and it's the most terrible thing in the world. They're like crying and their soul is crushed. And then finally, because he's only back there for a moment, he's not visible just for, and they feel such separation, right? And when Krishna was in the coils of the Kaliya serpent, it was the same thing. They saw Krishna struggling and he's underwater, and it looks like he's actually losing this fight. And they're also losing their life. They're thinking, but Krishna's our life. And if our life is struggling, then my life is nothing. So they're passing out on the banks of the Yamuna. So yeah, when we become pure devotees, the moment can last a long time. A long time can seem like a moment, and we can experience separation, even in unity, and unity and separation, both. Right? The place called Prem Sarovar? You know it? You know it? So Prem Sarovar, you're on your way back from like Nandagram. Yeah. It's on your way back from Nandagram on the left-hand side there. There's this. Now it looks a little different. It used to be just in a forest, but the origin of Prem Sarovar is Krishna and Radharani are sitting in a nice grove, and they're looking at each other, and they're actually experiencing like the ode on a Grecian urn, but to an extent that we can't even fathom. They're just enjoying one another, looking at each other, and interacting. And a bumblebee was flying around. And so one of the Caru boys, it might have been Madhu Mangala, but it seems like too many Madhus, so it might have been someone else. But he sees that, there's a bee, so he's probably bothering. So he takes his chutter and he shoos the bee away. And then he says, it's okay, Madhu's gone, the bee's gone, right? So Radharani hears Madhu's gone. She thinks, Madhu is gone? Even though she's looking at him. And she's feeling separation that he's gone, because she just heard. It must be true, she just heard, he's gone, even though she's looking at him. So she starts crying. And then Krishna's looking at Srimati Radharani, and she's crying, and it breaks his heart. So he starts crying. And then she sees him crying, and it makes her cry even harder. So their tears just fill up this lake. And that's Prem Sarovar. That's the origin of Prem Sarovar. So separation can be felt in unity, and unity can be felt in separation. When Srimati Radharani was talking to another bee, when Uddhava was there, and there was the song of the bee, so she thought, this is the messenger. And so she was so absorbed that she was actually feeling Krishna's presence. Also, when the gopis would be getting ready, we heard this from Dinabandhu Prabhu, sometimes when the gopis would be getting ready, they basically just called everything Krishna, because everything, like, can you hand me my Krishna? For the black stuff they put on their eyes because it's black. And then, or they're talking about, whatever they're talking about, they're thinking of Krishna. So they're speaking of different things, but they're calling him Krishna or Tama, or, they're names of Krishna. So, yeah, it's amazing. So time, space, all these things that we think that we have a handle on, a grasp on, none of these apply to the spiritual world. So yeah, however many quadrillions or whatever it was can certainly fit on a finite area. We went really far off of that. Sorry. But yeah, that was the inertia. Yeah, when Krishna's here, it's the spiritual world. So these things happen. Something else on Sambandha? Ishwara Chittaracha, yeah.
Just a little bit side thing that came to my mind when you were saying how the residents of Vrindavan, they were seeing how Krishna is fighting with Kali and suddenly he was disappearing under the water. And one time I was shopping in Navadvip and when I was coming back and I just met one of the brahmacharis here from the temple, and he was also going back. He just repaired his bike there and he was coming back and I was coming back and we were just about to go on the boat from Mayapur. And suddenly the last moment they announced that actually the boat will be changed. So all the people that were just about to go in one boat, even some of them were already in the boat, they had to go to the other one. So many people, like more than 100 people. And they started walking and he was walking with his bike. And suddenly the crowd started pushing more and more towards the end of the ghat. And I saw what's happening, like the crowd is, because he's on the other side on the bike and the people are pushing the bike and they started pushing me and I just turned for a second to see what's happening and then I turned back and he was not there.
Went into the water.
And people started like saying something this and I mean it's material emotion, but it like for 3 seconds maybe my heart went to pulse maybe 200 like that.
Wow.
And I was watching and water and nothing. It was kind of darker already. But they start like with lights, and he's not there. And like 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 40 seconds. And I, like my heart, I was thinking, oh, just don't exist. And after maybe close to a minute, he just came out. And like, I was like, Haribo, and then they gave him like a stick and he came out and we were on the boat and he was like dripping water. I said, what happened? Like, and he said, yeah, they just pushed me and I fell down. And I said, but why it took so long to come out? Like I was, and he said, because I had all these 3-4 bags on me, and the bike fell on me. And I had to remove the bike, then I had to remove all these bags because I cannot come out with them, they were too heavy. And only then I managed to come out.
All right, Krishna.
And anyway, everything finished nice. Actually, I saw him 2 days ago in the temple. Every time when I see him and I remember this. But just what I wanted to illustrate is that was just a material emotion.
Yeah. Imagine how much
it was so strong that like at some point you really feel that your existence will finish.
Yeah.
And what to speak of, like spiritual, the real transcendental.
In the case of the older cowherd ladies and Krishna in there on that pastime, it was so intense that they actually lost their life and then they were given their life back afterwards. But also, that night, everyone was so distraught about having experienced losing Krishna, because they actually experienced losing Krishna. He was fine the whole time, but since he was playing around as he does, they experienced that he was gone, and so they lost their life. Since they experienced losing Krishna, nobody went home that night because nobody wanted to take their eyes off of Krishna. So they all just sat there on the bank of the Yamuna and nobody went home. And they were just staring at Krishna until they fell asleep. And then there was a forest fire in the end to put that up. But yeah, it was so intense that they wouldn't let Krishna go home and they wouldn't go home. They said, no, because if I go home and I close my eyes and I'm not seeing Krishna, then I'm experiencing that all over again. You can't do that to me twice, Krishna. Right? So we can't even imagine that. You've had an experience so similar, but we can't imagine the magnitude, right? but we will. One day we'll imagine it, we'll feel it.
Explain again.
Yeah.
Page 28.
28.
Yeah.
Okay.
This paragraph. Love is the only inclination of the soul. 28. Yeah, this paragraph. Can you explain what?
Love is, this is a great paragraph.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite paragraphs because the way it's explained, it seems counterintuitive, right? So love is the only inclination of the soul. So this is talking about how knowledge is what was it? It's talking about knowledge and love. The characteristic nature is knowledge, and the characteristic inclination is love. So now this is talking about love specifically. So love is our only inclination, right? But its name changes according to the variation of propensities. For example, this attachment, love, for wealth is called greed, right? Because we love wealth, so we're greedy. If that same attachment, this love is reflected and it's toward female beauty, then it's called lust. So usually we know these two, greed and lust. We're trying to acquire wealth or women. Then this is where it gets interesting. When the same attachment, love in its perverted reflection, is manifested to distressed people, it is called kindness, right? Which sounds like a positive thing, but unless it's actually directed toward Krishna service, it's a negative thing, right? So it's still not pure love, Krishna. It's tainted by a desire to help distressed people, but we are the doer of that. We are helping them. Like the philanthropists who open hospitals and food kitchens that feed homeless people and things like that. They're helping distressed people because they think that they only have material problems, so they're giving them material solutions, right? So their reflected love is called kindness, because that's what they're doing. When that same attachment, that reflected love, is shown towards brothers or sisters, it's called affection. That's another one that doesn't sound so bad, affection, right? But it's just toward, brothers and sisters. They just happen to be related to you, so you're just, based on the body, you're showing them affection. Why not show the others affection? And then if you are showing them affection, is it because you're attracted to them, or because you actually see the spirit soul that's there in the Paramatma in your search? So in other words, it depends on your reason. So affection. When it is applied toward the benefactor, so that means someone who's providing something for you, it's called gratitude. So you're thankful, right? Because they're serving your material needs. So then that reflected version of pure love is called gratitude. When this inclination, again, the reflection of love is favorably manifested, so now we're actually proper. When this indication is favorably manifested, it is called love. So it's actual substance. And when it is unfavorable and unfavorably manifested, it's called enmity. In this way, the same single inclination, so it's all just love, is transformed in various forms. This inclination of the soul remains in its unalloyed nature only for the liberated souls, where it can reach infinite excellence. So unless we're liberated, there's still some tinges of greed, lust, kindness, affection, gratitude, etc. Right? Is that clear?
Liberated means this inclination of love goes only in the direction of Krishna.
Yes. Yeah. So we stop misusing our free will. Then instead of loving things that are focused around the material situation. So we're talking about redirecting consciousness and the microphone. I think I talk loud enough so even if it's pointing to you can hear it.
Pictures of those.
Yeah. But Yeah, that was one of my favorite paragraphs, actually, because, generally we think, when we think of good material qualities, we just think that they're somehow connected to transcendence. But they're just as bad as lust and greed because they're not connected to Krishna. So, although it's, preferable if you're going to misuse your love, preferable, at least if you're on the platform of pranamoy, that it's more along the lines of kindness, affection, and gratitude, and not lust and greed. But it still isn't going to get you back to the spiritual world. So just because it looks better materially doesn't mean it's actually better. If that
Behind
makes
all these stay love. Behind all these
Yes.
qualities,
because that's our only inclination.
pure love. Stay
Yeah.
pure love.
Yeah. Love is our only inclination. So it's either going to be the right way when we use our free will properly, then it's actually love. When we misuse our free will, it's lust, greed, or all these different things. Yeah. So Sutra 17 shows that love for the supreme is natural, spiritual, and brings the highest bliss. And then love for what is not supreme, so anything but the supreme, is artificial, material, and brings only suffering. So it's the same thing, but when it's directed properly, it's natural, it's spiritual, and it brings bliss. And when it's not given its proper, not aimed in the proper direction, it's artificial, material, and causes suffering. Yeah, that's a really important thing to understand. Anything else on Sambandha? Relationship? Ishvarchit, Achit? Okay. So we will start part 2, Abhidheya. So topic 4, this is 4 of the 5 topics of the Upanishads. All these Upanishads cover 5 topics. Does anyone remember all 5 of them? We just talked about 3. Chitta were 2 of them. What was before that? Ishvara, Chit, Achit. And then? Sadhana and Sadhya. Good. So this will be, which one? Sadhana or Sadhya?
This one, sadhana.
Good, yeah. So Abhidheya, topic 4, the means or process of attaining Brahman, the sadhana. This will cover mantras 1 through 3, mantra 9, mantra 11, and 15 through 18 of Śrī Īśopaniṣad. And here are mantras 1 and 2. Everything animate or inanimate that is within the universe is controlled and owned by the Lord. One should therefore accept only those things necessary for himself which are set aside as his quota, and one should not accept other things, knowing well to whom they belong. One may aspire to live for hundreds of years if he continuously goes on working in that way, for that sort of work will not bind him to the law of karma. There is no alternative to this way for man. And again, not surprisingly, this is parallel to this morning's class. We're talking about karma, akarma, and vikarma, right? So if one understands this isavasya principle, even though he's performing all these actions, he goes on working in this way, the work will not bind him, so it's karma, right? There is no alternative to this way for men. You can't, there's no other way. And again, when it's, Pandava Prabhu pointed this out too, because it said karma, jnana, and yoga, none of these will work, right? And then so Pandavaji pointed out that that verse, Harinama, 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 Evakevam, Klo, Nastyeva, 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 Gatiranata. The 3 Nastyevas are not through karma, not through jnana, not through yoga. So there's no way. What about this? Nope. What about this? Nope. What about this? Nope. No other way. Srila Prabhupada writes in his purport to the invocation mantra, the completeness of human life can be realized only when one engages in the service of the complete whole. All services in this world, whether social, political, communal, international, or even interplanetary, will remain incomplete until they are dovetailed with the complete whole. When everything is dovetailed with the complete whole, the attached parts and parcels also become complete in themselves. So a lot is said right here. And Paramatma, who is in Sanjay Prabhu's heart, inspired him to ask the question that he just asked, because we were just talking about love and how it's transformed into these different things, right? And this is saying that all services in the world, whether social, political, communal, international, or even interplanetary, will remain incomplete until they are dovetailed with the complete whole, right? So all these services that we're putting out, it's love in a different way, right? Being expressed through society, politics, community, international affairs, interplanetary affairs. Until we actually aim that love in the right direction, means it's dovetailed with the complete whole, then they're incomplete. And then the last sentence, when everything is dovetailed with the complete whole, the attached part and parcels also become complete in themselves. Also very important to understand. So we uncover our complete eternality, knowledge, and bliss when we're actually dovetailed with the complete whole, completely. All of our actions, our thoughts, our desires, our words, etc. Then our nature is completely revealed. In his purport to Śrī Īśopaniṣad Mantra 2, Srila Prabhupada writes, the instructions of Śrī Īśopaniṣad are more elaborately explained in the Bhagavad Gita, sometimes called the Gita-upanishad, the cream of all the Upanishads. In the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, verses 9 through 16, the personality of Godhead says that one cannot attain the state of naishkarmya or akarma without executing the prescribed duties mentioned in the Vedic literature. This literature can regulate the working energy of a human being in such a way that he can gradually realize the authority of the Supreme Being. Right? So the way actions become inaction is by doing them in conjunction with the desire of the Supreme Lord. Right? So this is saying the same thing as this morning. When he realizes the authority of the personality of Godhead, Vasudeva or Krishna, it is to be understood that he has attained this stage of positive knowledge. In this purified stage, the modes of nature, namely goodness, passion, and ignorance, cannot act, and he is able to work on the basis of naishkarmya. Such work does not bind one to the cycle of birth and death. Factually, no one has to do anything more than render devotional service to the Lord. However, in the lower stages of life, one cannot immediately adopt the activities of devotional service, nor can one completely stop fruitive work. A conditioned soul is accustomed to working for sense gratification for his own selfish interest, immediate or extended. So it means just for yourself or for your extended, could be family or your circle of friends or your community or your country, etc. Such work means the pure, does not bind one to the cycle of birth and death. Oh, actually, that was down there. Oh, immediate and extended, here we are, sorry. An ordinary man works for his own sense enjoyment, and when this principle of sense enjoyment is extended to include his society, nation, or humanity in general, it assumes various attractive names such as altruism, socialism, communism, nationalism, and humanitarianism. These isms are certainly very attractive forms of karma bandhana, karmic bondage, but the Vedic instruction of Śrī Īśopaniṣad is that one actually wants to live for any of the above isms, he should make them God-centered. So if these things appeal to you, that's fine, you can do them. but you should do them in a God-centered way. You want to feed people that are hungry, that don't have food? That's fine. You do that, but you make sure that everything that you're feeding them is offered to Krishna, right? So that's going to free them from karma, because otherwise you're just making them suffer more karma, right? Because food that's not offered in sacrifice is sin, right? It has to be offered in sacrifice. And then also, of course, the kirtan should accompany any prasadam distribution. So there's double benefit. Continuing, there is no harm in being or becoming a family man or an altruist, a socialist, a communist, a nationalist, or a humanitarian, provided that one executes his activity in relation with Īsavasya, the God-centered conception. So again, these things that seem good are love being, are reflected love being used in different ways, such as, what were they? Gratitude, affection, kindness. That was the other one that I was looking for. Yeah. These things are only good if one actually is following the Īsavasya principle, understanding that Krishna is the center, and then doing those according to the way Krishna wants these to be done. Continuing, how one can execute God-centered activities is elaborately explained in the Bhakti Rasa Amrita Sindhu by Srila Rupa Goswami. We have rendered this book into English as the Nectar of Devotion. We recommend this valuable book to all who are interested in performing their activities in the spirit of Śrī Īśopaniṣad. In the purport to mantra 18, Śrī Īśopaniṣad mantra 18, Srila Prabhupada writes, Vedic knowledge is transcendental and cannot be understood by mundane educational procedures. So one might ask, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? Sri Bhaktivinoda Thakur brought this up earlier too. Like, I think it was on day 1 or 2. Someone might say, what are you doing? So Vedic knowledge can't be understood by these mundane... Huh?
By study.
Yeah, that's basically what it says. I mean, there's other words that qualify what it actually means, but one can read that sentence and say, it's transcendental. It can't be understood by these educational procedures. Of course, it says mundane, but one might come to that conclusion. So what are we doing? What are we doing sitting here? This looks exactly like when I was in school, except I was able to sit in a more comfortable chair and fall asleep without the teacher noticing, right? And sometimes they let us watch movies, right? And I got recess. So what's the difference? No one wants to give a difference. They think it's the same as when we were in school. All right, Krishna. Okay, it's also good.
Well, I suggest that the difference is that in a mundane process of studying, you completely depend on your strength to understand the matter.
Okay. Yeah.
Whereas in this case, we are trying to understand as much as we can, but ultimately we know we cannot really understand. And that's why it's just a sacrifice, a yagya, in which we are trying to attract the mercy of Krishna, and then he will give us understanding. The Dhammi Buddhi Yogam Tam.
Joy. Yes, that's a very important distinction. I almost forgot that word. Yeah, and also the subject matter is different. So what you pointed out, that's the most important part. But also the subject matter is different. So in school we were learning how to manipulate material energy, right? And we were depending on our own skills in order to comprehend and apply that. But here, not only is the subject matter actually something that's going to give us eternal benefit, but it doesn't rely on material skills or qualifications, right? It relies on whether we accept it or not. And all of us have this tendency to understand this, right? Knowledge was our inherent what? How far back was that? It was before 20 seconds. Characteristic nature is knowledge, and the characteristic inclination is love. So our nature is knowledge and our inclination is love, right? So when we study transcendental knowledge, that inherent characteristic is there, but it has to be awakened, because we're so used to identifying with matter that we think this is knowledge, right? We think our suffering is bliss, we think this place is our eternal residence, and we think this material knowledge is actually something that's good, it's proper. But when we study Vedic knowledge, then this can be, the true knowledge can be awakened if we approach the spiritual master in a proper way. So it can't be understood by mundane educational procedures. It doesn't rely on our capacity to learn or our skills in any way. Continuing, one can understand the Vedic mantras only by the grace of the Lord and the spiritual master. Yasya deve para bhaktir yata deve tata gurau. That is Śrī-Īśopaniṣad 6:23. If one takes shelter of a bona fide spiritual master, it is to be understood that he has obtained the grace of the Lord. The Lord appears as the spiritual master for the devotee. Thus, the spiritual master, the Vedic injunctions, and the Lord himself from within all guide the devotee in full strength. In this way, there is no chance for a devotee to fall again into the mire of material illusion. The devotee, thus protected all around, is sure to reach the ultimate destination of perfection. The entire process is hinted at in this mantra, and Srimad Bhagavatam 1:2-17-20 explains it further. Hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord is itself an act of piety. The Lord wants everyone to hear and chant his glories because he is the well-wisher of all living entities. By hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord, one becomes cleansed of all the undesirable things, and then one's devotion becomes fixed upon the Lord. At this stage, the devotee acquires the Brahminical qualifications, and the effects of the lower modes of nature, passion and ignorance, completely vanish. The devotee becomes fully enlightened, and by virtue of his devotional service, fully enlightened by virtue of his devotional service, and thus he comes to know the path of the Lord and the way to attain him. So comes to know the path of the Lord is under Sambandha, the way to attain him, Abhidheya. As all doubts diminish, he becomes a pure devotee. The means of attaining Brahman is summarized, so that Abhidheya is summarized in the Dashamul Tattva as follows. Quote, pure devotional service is the living entity's occupation and means. That is Abhidheya. Okay, so we'll stop there. That way, tomorrow we'll start right at the beginning of chapter 4. So we just got a preview of Abhidheya. Any questions on that preview of Abhidheya? Essentially, we're taking, so the first 3 chapters, we're understanding the nature of spirit, the nature of material nature, the nature of Krishna, the source of both, and understanding the relationship between them. And then this is, how do we apply that knowledge? Once we know what the relationship is, then what do we do? Right? So this whole section is going to talk about how we properly apply the knowledge that is given. And then at the end, in chapter 5, we'll cover the goal. So the result then that will occur if we properly follow what we're going to talk about in this chapter 4. Any questions, concerns? Yeah.
So here when it is if we, let's say, first time encounter Prabhupada's books.
First time?
Encountering books.
Yeah.
So then there's this feeling that, immediately finally I found something that makes sense.
Yeah.
Awakening is happening at the time because of some previous, maybe regulatory security or
Yeah, generally, if you have that experience where you get these books and they seem familiar, like finally this is what I've been looking for. Generally, that means that in your previous life you've gone a pretty good distance with it. Generally, this is why most of us, when we first encounter the devotees of Prabhupada's books and finally read them, because some devotees, you hear stories about how they actually had a collection of books sitting on the shelf that they just hadn't read yet, but they were at least pious enough when the devotee handed it to them, they'd give a donation and put it on their shelf instead of into the garbage can. And then finally one day they read. But generally, when we first encounter the devotees and actually start associating with them, there seems to be a very quick period of spiritual advancement, very quick. And then for some, it's like it goes, and it's like it's crazy how someone, he's only been around for 6 months, but he's like knows all the shlokas and is very familiar with. And sometimes it's but either way, no matter what, no matter where we get to, it's a very quick growth because we're picking up where we left off. So we're understanding concepts that we've understood before, but now in our current body, we're able to catch up with all these things. So there they are. Then sometimes it seems like we hit this obstacle and it's tough to make advancement because now we're actually relying on what we're learning now instead of what we did in our previous lives. So oftentimes, if someone has this experience when they first encounter Srila Prabhupada's books and they're like, yes, finally, this is what I've been looking for, right? Then that means, most likely they've had an encounter with this exact philosophy in the past. So for me, it was a moment like that. Because I started looking for a pure form of religion before I heard the term Hare Krishna before. I think we all had because it's in all these different movies, right? Karate Kid, he's chanting Hare Krishna with these sandpaper things. But I didn't actually register it as Hare Krishna. I thought he said Adi Pushka.
What, Hari?
Adi Pushka, Adi Pushka. I didn't hear Hare Krishna. I heard Adi Pushka. That's what I heard. I even repeated it to someone. They were like, hey, remember when he did the sand things? And I was like, oh yeah, he was like, Adi Pushka, Adi Pushka.
Like Prabhupada, in one tape, he's saying, sit properly.
Chintamani.
I was always hearing Chintamani.
Oh, you heard that too?
Yeah, I was thinking Prabhupada is English.
There's a story. Do you know this other story though? There's a story where some devotees were actually saying, as they're chanting japa, they're saying Chintamani. And someone's like, why are you saying Chintamani? They're like, Srila Prabhupada does it. You didn't know that story?
No.
So you also thought he was saying Chintamani, but you didn't, try to, that's far out. Yeah. So many things happen like this. So anyway, I heard the name Krishna before, but it didn't register. But I was looking for a pure form of religion where people actually followed what their scriptures said. And I went to all these different churches, Jewish temples. I was reading about anything I could get my hands on, Buddhism, Islam, Hinduism. And I found that they all had really good philosophy, but no one really took it that seriously. And so I was bummed out. So finally, when I met the devotees, even though I heard technically Hare Krishna before, it didn't catch yet. And when I met the devotees and saw, okay, they take it seriously. This is the philosophy. If you actually want it to work, you have to follow it this way. It's not, you can do what you want. God will forgive you for sins. That didn't appeal to me. Because to me, I understood that, sin meant this Īśopaniṣad principle. If you live not according to the Īśopaniṣad principle, you're sinning. If you think anything is yours, that's a sin, right? That's this principle. I understood that from studying the Bible, but nobody was living that way. So when I met the devotees and I said, okay, they're living this, so it was like a eureka moment. So it means my previous life I must have come in contact with this philosophy. But yeah, generally that's how it is. But yeah, and then sometimes we find devotees that even from the beginning, they're just it's a slow process. It's their first time around. You know, they're learning a little bit, they come around, then they start coming around a little more often. And they've been around for like 30 years and they still have long hair and, you know, all these things, but they steadily come around and they're steadily learning little by little, more and more, right? And that's okay, that's fine. But, you know, probably means it's their first time around. You know, not that you can't, even if it's your first time around, you can't go quickly through, but, you know, it's an indication of when you first start out, how much is there in that beginning that quickly comes. That's usually an indication of where you left off. Okay, we've gone over time. Sorry about that. Om Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Shri Prabhupada ki jai, Bhakti-yoga Thakur ki jai, Shri Tattva-sutra ki jai.